Okay, thank you. Perhaps maybe I share a little bit of experience on how I become living in a multiverse. Because usually when I attend a conference, then people will address me as a doctor. You will address me as doctor. Yeah, that's a Cantonese pronunciation. And so actually my Taiwanese friends will call me Dr. Wu, because that's the proper Mandarin pronunciations. And my American friends will address me as Dr. Ng, because there's no vowel sound in NG, and my last name is NG. And I would suspect that when we get the last name from the Hong Kong government, most likely the British was thinking about like an NG, you know, when we have taken a movie, when it's really no good, then they say NG, and then you need to repeat it again, right? And so when we say NG, then the kind of sounds that you will make is So that will be a proper Cantonese pronunciations, I suppose. So, okay. Anyway, it was very pleased to host the sessions today, and thanks for the invitations from the organizer. Okay. So another short stories that I would like to share with you is, as far as I understand, like because that's the privilege to be an old dog, all right? Because I've already retired. So the first time when I visited a costume museum in Taiwan, that was in Fujian Catholic University. And at that time, I was also teaching in the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And what we really love to do is to replicate a similar costume museum in our university. And then it also turns out that money is not a problem, but space is the biggest challenge that we cannot handle. And in fact, at that time, even though if we throw all the our machineries away, then we still don't have enough space for hosting a museum in at our university. And so I guess our speaker today will let you know how this problem can be solved today, how we can keep certain items in the digital forms after we transform it into digital forms. Then storage is no longer a problem, okay? So let me introduce the speakers. Ms. Beata Wilczek, if I pronounce it correctly, all right? So Beata works across fashions and tech as a researchers, educators, and strategists. And she's an advocate for sustainabilities, digital transformations, and systematic change in fashion and creative industry. In 2021, she founded a fashion consultancy, Upfolding Strategies, and joined NFT marketplace, the Materialized, and as the head of Impact. Unfolding Strategies is a Berlin-based consultancy and research lab for digital, diverse, and climate-positive fashion futures. So she has an academic background in social psychologies, fashion studies, and digital cultures and creating. Very impressive. Beata has also been teaching for over 10 years at various universities worldwide, because time's coming short. So let me continue with a little bit information. So from year 2007 to 2017, she worked extensively as a fashion art directors, VR film concept developers, and contemporary art creators on projects for such clients as Uniqlo, Diesel, etc. And so, because time is running short, so can we invite the speakers stage? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for a lovely introduction. Now I can really see how my bio is very tied to what I'm going to be presenting today. I hope you can hear me well, that everything is working. If something is off, just, I don't know, let me know. Can you hear me? Can I get like a thumbs up? Okay, cool, thank you. So my name is Beata Wilczek. I have a pleasure of joining you today from Berlin, where I've been living for last 8 years. Presenting to you today a report that we publish as a self-initiated project with Unfolding Strategies. This whole report is about thinking about the potential of digital assets in fashion, there are many hyper positive, but also critical voices commenting on digital fashion, but this is nothing new. Every time when we are facing new technology, we tend to be either scared or very excited. So this is something that I'm trying to see how actually culture is a part of this conversation. So I would like to share my screen now. You can see me now and that everything will run smoothly. So I would like to share I hope you're seeing my screen now, and we can start with the presentation. Okay, so our report is a part of Unfolding Strategies Insights. It's the first one that we ever published. And as we are a consultancy, but also an education lab, it's important for us to do research out in the open, but also share with our community our findings, the things that we find interesting, curious. Currently, I'm writing up a paper which will be published in a book coming up later this year. It's published by a Danish university. So I also will be supporting some reflections on this presentation as I present reading the text. So please be gentle. For now, it's just a draft. And the question I was very intrigued with was, how can digital assets support cultural heritage and cultural sustainability? And I know it's a rather lengthy question, but I think it's also important to differentiate between cultural heritage and cultural sustainability, because heritage in fashion, especially for example, luxury fashion houses, is a very, very big deal. And we know that, and we like to think that, I don't know, a certain pattern or print or a logo comes from 1990s, 1920s, and been, meaningful and powerful until today, like for example, Louis Vuitton logo. But cultural sustainability also is very, very significant, as we are contributing to making new worlds and expanding the fashion system as we already know it, making it more virtual, more digital. There are also many claims that this world will be able to be more plural and embrace more people. So it's also crucial to think, whose stories get to be told, and also how does it contribute to the bigger debate on sustainability in digital fashion, because this is also a hot topic that I'm personally interested in. Oh, I cannot. Oh yeah, now I'm changing my phone. Okay, so the report, which is also available on our website, unfoldingstrategies.com, in the insights part, and it's open access and everybody can freely download it and have it and read it. So I really recommend it to you too. It's divided into introduction, some kind of mapping of the landscape, what are the relationships between fashion culture, Web2 and Web3, and what do they actually mean? And then I will present 12 cases, 7 stemming from off-chain examples. So when fashion is digitized, digital assets are involved, but the blockchain is not involved, and then on-chain. And I will explain why and share with you key takeaways, thinking actually what digital assets can do for fashion and culture. So as I said, Unfolding Strategies is a consultancy and education lab for digital, diverse, and sustainable fashion Web3. We educate, train, design, and consult with fashion and lifestyle brands on digital fashion, social responsibility, and sustainability. We know that many fashion brands, I think there's much more now than 100, create and sell digital assets, such as NFTs, but not only in the last 2 years. As digital assets are becoming the new normal, we need to investigate what values and cultures do they sustain, and how can they support diversity and plurality in fashion. We selected 12 cases where brands, designers, and artists introduce digital assets in support of cultural heritage and cultural sustainability. We divide them into 2 categories. So yeah, now I invite you to unpack them with me. As you can see here on the left, these are the cases that we included. So we have Design Studio Superficial, independent designer Rosella Franco, a fashion designer from Africa, Hanifa. We have also an exhibition from my alma mater, St. Martin's, and Momu, a famous museum and fashion museum in Antwerp, Dress X, Skawanetti, and Malik Afagbois. So it's a very kind of eclectic mix of both fashion startups, independent practitioners, and artists. And with cases on chain, we have Lablaco collaborating with Fondazione Susani, Paco Rabanne doing a project with Selfridges, very interesting startup, which is also now having a very, very interesting activation during the Metaverse Fashion Week. So I would also encourage everyone to check that out if you obviously have time, because I know that schedule is busy in Taipei with today's event. Dematerialize with Sedim is a project that I led as one of the initiatives at the fashion tech startup, the Dematerialize, and Archive, which is not specifically about fashion, but it is a decentralized museum. So these are the cases that I'm going to bring to you. I'm going to start with setting up also some key terms and saying how I define Web3. Obviously, it's a definition in the making. How we can define in the context of this report cultural heritage and what is cultural sustainability. I think at this moment it's also important to highlight that this report was reviewed or audited by two practitioners. One, Maria Paula Fernandez, who is a founder of JPEG. She is an expert in decentralization and blockchain, particularly in the context of contemporary art. So she was our reviewer and making sure that there's no mistakes and everything is correct when it comes to Web3. And also Dr. Erika de Gref from Cape Town, who is a co-founder of African Fashion Research Institute, also looking at all the aspects of technology and culture and decolonization within the report. So Web3 is a technological stack responding to issues and limitations of Web2, decentralized by nature. It may incorporate blockchain technologies and token-based economics. It is also an emerging techno-philosophical concept addressing the new vision of internet, where users are in control of their own data and identity. In fashion, it is closely linked to new digital products, NFTs, creator economy, supply chain, product authentication, and transparency. When we think about cultural heritage, it doesn't feel that link, I would say, to Web3, because when we think about Web3, we think about innovation and future. But cultural heritage is a heritage of tangible, intangible, and natural assets of a group or society that is inherited from past generations. So in terms of actions, it's all about preservation and conservation, and it centers on memory, values, and giving voice to, for example, marginalized heritages, but not only. In fashion, this is related to tradition, legacy, and craft. And then the other component, the keyword of today, is cultural sustainability, which could be referred to as the opposite of cultural appropriation and exclusion. So in fashion, it refers to transmitting, supporting the knowledge, transfer of traditional knowledge and traditional cultural expression to future generations. And it answers the questions, what cultures will exist in the future and whose cultural values will be represented. Now I will read a little bit from my paper. So here we created this timeline on the slide, so I hope that will be helpful. Time is not linear, but we are used to representing time in a linear way. So I'm trying to kind of map out for you and visualize how those all concepts and as well as Web2 come together. In this report, I frequently refer to newly emerging concepts in both fashion and technology, making it essential to provide a summary of how Web2, the internet as we know and experience it today, has transformed fashion. If I were to identify our current position and imagine a linear progression, I would suggest to referring to the juncture as Web 2.5, emphasizing its processual and emergent nature. Web 2 has significantly impacted the fashion industry and fashion media in various aspects, including how fashion is consumed, produced, and promoted. Some of the key changes brought about by Web 2 are accessibility, sharing, user-generated content, and the emergence of e-commerce, and obviously sustainability. Accessibility to fashion products and information enabled real-time engagement, participation, and collaboration. It was also made possible by new commerce and social media platforms. The online retailers offer also consumers the convenience of shopping from their homes. Social media platforms and microblogging are linked to the progressing sharing of user-generated content. It fashion led to the rise of fashion bloggers and influencers, sharing about trends and style tips across different channels, which undermine the dominance of conventional fashion media outlets. This also introduced the topics that were previously absent from fashion media discourse, increased transparency and communication facilitated by Web2, created a demand for accountability and activist movements, especially ignited by the Rana Plaza factory collapse in 2013. These factors contributed to the growing awareness of sustainability and ethics in the fashion industry. So in short, if we are referring to how internet is changing, the internet that we have today, the Web 2, has revolutionized the fashion industry and fashion media by giving access to the flow of information, fostering real-time engagement, and promoting collaboration and innovation. It has disrupted traditional fashion media, giving rise to new voices and perspectives, while also increasing consumer awareness of this industry's environmental and ethical challenges. In the context of cultural heritage and cultural sustainability, the emergence of fashion exhibitions and their documentation, as well as microblogging leading to creation of independent archives, are particularly important. So I would like to take 3 examples how actually what to me is very interesting about how Web2 transform, how we engage and how we archive and preserve fashion. Fashion exhibitions are actually, we can think, a quite recent phenomenon and a successful one when we think about famous exhibitions like Alexander McQueen and V&A, or all the exhibitions at Metropolitan Fashion Institute in New York. There was one exhibition in my life that I really wanted to see, but I didn't, but I also kind of did. It was a Hussein Chalayan retrospective at Design Museum in London. And because it was, I think it was in around maybe 2007, 2010, this is the time that exhibitions are already starting to be documented very thoroughly. We don't yet have that much opportunity to virtually navigate the spaces. Like for example, if anybody wanted to see the Comme des Garçons show at the Metropolitan Museum, that was possible. Here it wasn't yet. But because of a very good documentation, I felt like I saw this show. So this kind of unlocks a possibility of attending it virtually. Obviously, it does not replace the experience of seeing the show in flesh, but it unlocks that possibility. Previously, that wouldn't be possible. And if we ask certain questions pointing into the direction of further decentralization and Web3, the question could be, what if the shows from the start would try to envision this duality of both digital and physical? So what if we would create those shows in a more physical format, and how NFTs could play a part in them? The second example is social media, particularly such platforms that were used for mood boarding or microblogging like Pinterest and Tumblr, because they put a lot of new and archival fashion images in motion. So fashion mood boarding and curating became a common activity that everyone could do. Still, the question lingers, who really owns those visual collections, and what happens when the platform ceases to exist? And who gets to say what's included and what's excluded? There are many famous cases of censorship, for example, on Instagram. So these are also quite crucial questions that can also be addressed in some cases. They're also addressed in the case I will present in a second. And the third example is archives, which are pretty much stemming from independent building of certain platforms or making archives on social media. One of the good examples is Fashion Race Database. It's a quite formal example where an interesting project that was embedded within university by Kimberly M. Jenkins actually got out from university and now has a life as an entity, as a startup, as a business on its own. And Fashion Race Database raises such important topics as cultural appropriations, politics of visibility and decolonization. So it kind of inserts and questions and produces context for the images that, for example, were missing on Pinterest, on Tumblr, and they were not rotating in what we would call in the past a typical fashion visual vocabulary. Another examples that, for example, exists only on Instagram is Asian Fashion Archive that aims also to show a plurality of different Asian fashions and cultures. So it can also further answer question, you know, what if fashion archives would incentivize creators and bring communities together? And also what if a particular community could contribute as a group or different groups to what is actually being archived? These are the certain questions that the projects I will show you try to answer. I will start with the examples that are not using blockchain technology. The first one, and I think one of the first projects where I saw digital fashion and was a bit out by it, I was quite impressed, mainly because I like the choices of what they digitize, was a virtual fashion archive created by Superficial Studio in New York in 2019, where the design studio took archival fashion beyond its physical form, digitizing such garments as Issei Miyake, Please Please, Here's the Dress from 1996. The main aim was to give access to a wide audience from around the world so they can discover and appreciate these garments. The archive is not very big, it's only 6 silhouettes. Some of them are Miyake, some are Comme des Garçons. So it's not many silhouettes. It's a very interesting project already thinking, okay, if we digitize fashion piece, it can also be interesting for other people to engage with it. What is also quite fascinating is the movement that we can see in this project and how the garments stretch on their own. I don't have it here on my slide, but I really encourage you to check the website. There's something very seductive visually about it. And this idea has been taken, I would say, a little bit farther towards a cultural and social context by a former student of mine, Rosella Franco. I was supervising her MA project at AMD Berlin in a master program called Sustainability in Fashion Creative Industries. I was co-supervising it with Professor Federica von Bedel-Parlov. And Rosella had this interesting idea of taking certain examples of weaving and beading and embroidery that are native to part of India that she knew very well, and preserving them digitally, and also using this opportunity to create a platform where artisans could be connected with other designers. So here is all about preserving craftsmanship, but also connecting artisans and designers. So it has also this buildup of an interesting business model. It only was a prototype, but I still think for the time when it was envisioned in 2020, it was a very interesting initiative. Other examples of digitizing garments and telling cultural stories is Hanifa, a fashion brand created by a Congolese designer, Hanifa Novembre. She introduced digital assets during the presentation of her Pink Label Congo collection in 2020. And in this case, we could see that invisible model. So there is a ghost of a body, but there's no body, like in the movie Hollow Man a little bit. This is something that we saw in 2019, 2020, and 2021, like quite a lot, with also brands like Fabricant. So there is this like garment magically floating on the screen on an invisible body. And her garments are interesting because they were also largely inspired by the landscapes and colors of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And she just had her virtual show on Instagram Live. Obviously, this happens during the pandemic. She also used her work to shed light on the historic disparities in Central Africa and to raise awareness of the abuse, extortion, and forced labor of illegal coltan mining. Yeah, and here is one of the quotes that we thought was important for our report, that Web3 is not only about the future, it is also about preserving the past, creating inclusive spaces and giving access to people, their stories and perspectives. Then another example, I would say, again, more classical and more formalized, as associated with serious university research and a very beautiful and elegant exhibition making. It's a show, Exploding Fashion. I think it's titled From 2D to 3D, which took place at MOMU. And it was also a research project at Central St. Martin's. And it explored how pattern cutting in 20th century fashion could be understood for practices of making, unmaking, and remaking. And it reverse engineered 5 historical designs, one by Madeleine Vionnet, one by Charles James, one by Rei Kawakubo, one by Halston, and the last one by Cristobal Balenciaga. They were digitally reanimated, and it functioned in a way that the patterns were reconstructed digitally and then put on avatars or look exactly like the mannequin. So when you were in a quite small yet beautifully designed exhibition space, you could see an avatar, but then on a massive screen, you would see the avatar dancing in the same garment, and you would also see the original hanging next to it. So it created very different forms of engagement. There was not much within the show how those digitized patterns, those digitized iconic garments could be used, studies remade. I can imagine that they could be really beneficial for designers or fashion students. They were predominantly giving this dynamic and lift form. So I think there's much more to explore, but I think for that we would need to dig a bit deeper in the research itself, not only in its presentation. Still a very interesting usage of an avatar as a mannequin and the digitized historical garments, making a storytelling within a show more dynamic and more active. Because if you've ever seen fashion exhibitions, they can be quite static, and there are always certain limitations on how to present historical pieces in fashion. Then another example, taking it more towards social causes, is a project by Leslie Patoka, Ukrainian designer, who digitized a traditional Ukrainian headpiece dedicated to Ukrainian Independence Day together with DressX. This coincides with a Russian invasion in Ukraine, and it's a part of Support Ukraine collection by DressX. DressX, both founders come from Ukraine, so this was also linked to that. And the spike of rice, one of the traditional Ukrainian symbols, reflecting the fertile soil and unity of the people. So here we have, on one hand, cultural symbolic, but also this kind of idea of fashion community coming together in unity in support of a particular social cause that the companies actually, and designer associated with themselves. Another example that is very inspiring to me and very fascinating, because also of a very long history of working with digital environments, body representation, and fashion, but not only, is a project which was presented during the Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto by Montreal-based Mohawk artist Skawenati. Skawenati creates projects that posit Indigenous futures, and she's known for videos set in Second Life. And I think today, doing research on Second Life, it's very important to think how fashion, life, business were envisioned there, because this is almost like a trial phase for what we're now seeing developing so rapidly with all the discussions, for example, about metaverse and how we're going to live there. So what she does is that she creates those videos based and set in Second Life, thinking what Indigenous life could look like in the future. She decided to bring her virtual world to the runway and presented Calico and Camouflage Assemble, where cyberpunk activist avatars reinforce the inseparability of personal fashion and protest. What is interesting, this was also presented in the streets, I believe, of Montreal, as kind of life-size prints on the street. So it's interesting that this project could actually function both on the street as an art piece, but also being presented during the Fashion Week. And I think this bringing Indigenous futures and speculating on what are Indigenous futures and bringing other cultures is particularly fascinating and valuable for fashion in Web3. Another project which kind of functions as a similar strategy is a project that got a lot of traction online and a lot of press. It is a AI-generated fashion show by Malik Afegboa, a Nigerian AI artist and filmmaker. He created AI-generated series of images called Fashion Show for Seniors. And what he did is that he combined traditional African Nigerian fashion with Afrofuturism. The images mimic typical Fashion Week snapshots, All the models are senior citizens. And with this project, he gave visibility and challenge what he sees as the marginalization of older people in society. He also used AI to test alternative scenarios and reimagine what potentially a fashion show could be. So again, giving visibility and testing alternative scenarios, it's a very interesting part here. And I would like to read this quote by Erika de Graaf and Angela Janssen. Erika was working on this report with us. We are taken to unlearn the claim of one universal fashion system. It faces us with the responsibility to activate a global network of connected, yet self-determining fashioning coalitions for an environmentally and culturally sustainable, ethical, and socially just fashionscape. It's a very academic quote, but to me, it's quite important because if we are expanding the fashion as we know it, it's very important to think about different fashions, make it plural, and not only say there is fashion from Paris, from Milan, and from New York. This has proven to be quite reductionist approach, and hopefully with access to digital tools, we can really plurify what fashion means and how it's being represented. Now heading to the other examples, which include NFTs and blockchain technology. Here we have archival project where archives became phygital, so blending physical and digital, and allowed to expand an exhibition. So here, Fondazione Sosani, which celebrates the legacy of late Vogue Italia editor-in-chief. The foundation is located in Milan, hosts exhibitions and presents publications on art, photography, fashion, and design. Through Spin by Lablaco, 50 archival luxury garments previously owned by Sosani have been digitized with the help also of fashion students and put on blockchain, making each garment a phygital available as an NFT. And profits from the collection support the Franca Sosani Fund for Preventive Genomics at Harvard Medical School. So what it means is that there is an archive, there are 50 garments, and those garments are not only shown and sold to support either the archive or for the medical research causes, but they have digital twins. And you can buy either just a digital twin or both together. And this is quite interesting exercise. I don't think the project was, I wouldn't assess it extremely successful, but it shows certain thought leadership and very interesting ideas that I think later can be taken and explored further. So it's very interesting how digital twin is used here for expanding the archive and the exhibition and also selling archival fashion. So even if we think now about resale, that also opens many interesting questions. Then another archival project, it was fashion house Paco Rabanne in collaboration with Selfridges in London. They, as they said, united the past, present, and future by creating 12 NFT dresses based on conceptual couture designs from here's a wrong date. It wasn't 1996. It was much earlier. Maybe it was 1969. Debut collection. All profits from NFTs fund Paco Rabanne's archive, including buying back archival garments, sketches, image rights, videos, and radio recordings, and improving preservation storage. So the way also to get the archive back together, the physical archive, by creating and redistributing digital assets, is also quite interesting. So it's a way to generate capital to make an archive live. That's how it was explored. The next example, and one of the last ones, is Alt. Alt is a digital fashion platform, emerging startup. They only were founded, I think, last year, dedicated to unlocking the value of cultural heritage and archival fashion. Digital Dunhuang is a capsule collection inspired by Chinese art, and Mogao Grottos, the system of 500 temples located in Dunhuang, UNESCO Global Geopark. The assets play the role of storytellers and aim to bring cultural heritage and diversity into the digital sphere. So pretty much our idea was an embodiment of what I was looking for and I was searching for. What they do, and what is interesting to me, that they work with different curators and they emphasize on different cultures. They have a project now during the Metaverse Fashion Week, which presents different practitioners working with culturally specific fashion and how they enter the digital realm with their projects. So I find it very, very interesting. And we also did together a panel for the Responsible Fashion series organized by the University of Antwerp. So if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share a link. It is also available on YouTube. One of the projects that I initiated in late, I think, 2021, when I joined the Dematerialized, a fashion NFT e-commerce platform, a fashion tech startup, was to partner with a quite particular university design school based in Monterrey, Mexico, where students work in big teams on their final projects, and they're very interdisciplinary, and they know how to design games, they know how to design digital fashion. They have very, very good digital skills, and they're interested in working with industry. And we thought, what if we could do something that we cannot really do with our partners, like big fashion houses and fashion brands? What if we could test certain potentialities and ideas? And I asked them to work with a local community and think how one could bring indigenous knowledge to Web3. So kind of against the standardization and futurization of everything, trying also to disrupt the aesthetics of digital fashion, because digital fashion poses itself as having this potential for being super creative. But what we see very much appropriates the aesthetics and visual language of sci-fi movies, cyber aesthetics, and gaming. So it makes sense because this is kind of where it comes from. So it brings it with it, but it's also important to break it down. And I always give this example why, for example, Italian luxury house would create a Blade Runner inspired and theme metaverse activation, which is not really linked to its brand heritage, to its aesthetic, to its visuals. When can we bring those things together? So for me, working with this local community of people somewhere in Monterrey, Mexico, that students had to choose and invite them to be co-creators, not only a theme of inspiration. It's very similar to working, for example, with a heritage brand like MS. Like, what kind of stories? How do you weave in the tradition and certain aspects of making? But here it was also interesting to see how those different forms of knowledge, different ways of thinking about, space and interaction could be brought into this very digital project in the end. So we were interested in expanding digital design and storytelling by bringing different values, histories, and cultural references, as well as we tested different incentivization models. Very often, thanks to projects like Diet Prada, we hear that certain communities are an object of cultural appropriation. So here we thought, what if actually a particular group of people could be incentivized when fashion is sold? So, for example, every time that the NFT from this project would be sold, the community also does work on it, either gets a chunk of it, certain percentage, or they can donate it to a particular cause, making them also contributors in the sense of making money out of it. And as Maria Paula Fernandez, our other review, it mentions, Web3 is not about ownership or speculative assets. Web3 refers to a stack of technologies that are decentralized, permissionless, and censorship resistant, able to archive, preserve, and store cultural objects, as well as building alternative resilient technological systems. The last example that I think is fantastic, where community becomes a creator and decides what gets included in the collection, is Archive. It is a DAO, a decentralized museum, and meeting people from around the world as members and enabling them to vote on what historical and artistic artifacts the museum will acquire. Displaying the pieces in various global locations and recording their historical provenance and authenticity in a smart contract, which is very, very crucial here. This is somewhat similar to what Alter is trying to do with fashion. In September 2022, Archive community voted to include 3 cloth fans created by Vincent Patterson for Madonna's Vogue MTV performance in 1990. So community voted that they want those iconic Madonna performance fans included in collections, so they are. So it also always opens up this question, who curates the archive, who is in charge of it, who gets to say what was important and crucial in the past and what should be preserved. So to sum it up, digital assets in fashion can help to archive through digitizing, preserve craft, create access, They can also help put archives on chain, accumulate funding for archives, work with different communities. They can also incentivize creators, like we saw with the dematerialized Sedim examples, tell stories relevant to own communities, and reimagine paths for the future. So yeah, that way they can embrace cultural sustainability and cultural heritage. Thank you so much. That's all. We are currently working on a new report, with more interest on user experience with the body. You can also contribute to this report. So you can also find it where this report is located online on unfoldingstrategies.com/insights. So yeah, you can find it there. I will now stop sharing my screens and I hope we will have some questions.
Thank you very much, Beata. You have a very eye-opening presentations today, and I'm very delighted. And actually, as an old dog, I can also learn some new tricks today as well. And so there are a few questions that we receive. All right. Okay, and so the first one would be like this. So why? Oops, sorry, a little bit. When you have too many equipment
tools.
Okay. All right. So why are diversities and inclusions important in the content of a digital fashions?
Well, I think if we think about digital fashion, it's a mix of two words. Like one is digital, second is fashion. So inclusion and diversity is important in everything digital because it affects everyone globally. And we can see that the world, the way it was shaped digitally by now, wasn't very inclusive, and it's particularly formatted in a certain way. Nevertheless, it positively impacts people's lives. So it has this twofold effect. When it comes to fashion, fashion by definition is also used to be exclusive. So somehow exclusion was imprinted in what in some ways we could define as fashion. But as the access to it is becoming more broad and more digital, it would be great to also try to challenge itself and learn from past mistakes and open up more. Also considering the shifting world economy and thinking about dynamic developments in, China, Nigeria, India. It's also important for fashion to, I think, lose a little bit of its global north dominance and open up more to the whole world and also enrichen it. Also kind of bridging the gap between what we consider high fashion and what is considered locally specific.
Okay, thank you. And so the second question is, it seems community will be an important factor. Could you please provide a few suggestions of building up communities environment and how to encourage people to join in?
That's a tough one. So my background is in social psychology. So it's all about, social psychology is all about thinking, what does the group of people do? What motivates them? And how to either impact or predict their behavior and what particular condition does that. So I'm quite amazed how very quickly we have swapped the term target audience, target group with community. And there's a lot of great things about it because somehow community gives this promise for everybody to be seen and to be able to participate. And that very much for such an industry as fashion, that kind of flips the whole order because again, this exclusivity and distance is suddenly interrupted. To give an example of that, and I think this is an interesting community building exercise, was when Show Studio, led by Nick Knight, launched its own NFTs and launched its own Discord. And for those who don't know what Discord is, it could be considered a social media platform when people can communicate. And it just looks like you're engaged in a forum and talk to different people. And it was, to me, fantastic in the way that they set up the community and started growing and building it around the anticipation of the NFTs, was that I could see that whoever that was, I don't know, could engage with Nick Knight. And for me, when I was 19, I lived in London and I love Nick Knight. For me, he was like an absolute guru. Back then I was trying to work as an art director and stylist. So he was like the hottest, most exciting thing. And to think now that I could just go on Discord and type and be like, hey, I love what you do, and there will be a response coming from that person, that's quite fascinating. And it also shows that places like Shoe Studio are giving into this kind of shortening of the conversation. But for fashion brands, it's very difficult. So we can also see many not successful form of building communities and engaging with them. Other example is that successfully built community can also serve as a, almost free R&D, research and development team, which when I think about Clo 3D, so the software for making digital fashion, it's amazing that they have very active community that tells them what works, what doesn't work, what needs to be changed, so they can respond. The same can be applied to fashion design. We don't like this jacket in yellow, please make it red. So it's just, I think, about having conversation and thinking how we can engage in different ways digitally with people who already want to be associated with us, either we are brands, institutions, or software tools.
Okay, thank you. And so we have another question. So how is culture sustainability even relevant to digital fashions? Would you like to comment on this?
Yeah, sure. I think cultural sustainability, if we were to divide sustainability as a set of certain topics, I don't know, like a cake, cultural sustainability is one of them. So we can also think about environmental sustainability and carbon footprint. We can think about social sustainability. So who is making our things and how fairly are they being incentivized for that? And cultural sustainability is also very crucial because it's all about what culture and what cultural references will exist in the future, or
connected to desktop BL202.
Okay. It was. Yeah. Should I continue? Yeah. So basically that we don't repeat an issue of cultural appropriation. That's why it's very important that we don't reintroduce the things we've been doing all this time in fashion to digital fashion.
Okay, thank you. And so there's one last question on the systems. And so what can you comment on the values of the digital access in fashions?
Comment on digital access.
Because it seems like when we are working with a museum in the Web2 scenario, then actually it's quite straightforward that we can do a little bit of a storage saving and then transform the physical items into the digital form. Then that is nothing really compared, as you mentioned today, on the possibilities under the Web 3.0 scenarios. So would you like to comment a little bit further on the values of these digital assets?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, I think that the thing that could change the most is putting them on chain, having them as NFTs, having that they have smart contracts, and there is more information to them. And I would be curious even to see, thinking from this like even more like museum, archival, traditional perspective, how even it helps rent certain pieces from institution to an institution, and how it becomes, a part of the life and story of that garment. But other than that, I don't have that many. I think it's all about exploring those new different forms. If any one of you, I presume some of you, been to different archives, it's very often hard to access them. Everything is very preserved. You almost need to know what you're looking for. So actually having this, I almost imagine it, that fashion archives could work like what students at Bunka in Tokyo have access to. When I visited them and I gave a lecture there, they invited me to see the building. It was a 4-hour tour. It was a very fascinating experience. Never happened to me at any other fashion institution or university. And they show me how all the educators can like pick freely from all the garments. where I studied at Central St. Martin's, that wasn't possible. Everything was very sealed. You had to wear gloves. There was very different approach to it. So if we were to envision a fashion archive existing online and being digitized, that also could help us examine the garments differently. But how centralizing could be and how it plays with, you know, between in this kind of Web 2.5 condition, I think time will show, and I'm curious to see projects around it.
Okay, thank you very much. So that will be all for the questions on the systems. And do we have any questions from the floor? Because we feel we still have a few minutes left. Any questions? Okay. Oh, if not, then can I ask a personal questions from me? Because it seems like, particularly nowadays, everybody is now talking about artificial intelligence. And then, in fact, I'm also telling my students, because I'm still teaching part-time now these days. So I'm telling my students that the AI is going to make a very huge impact on their careers. And so would you like to comment a little bit on how the artificial intelligence will impact on the topics that you're presenting today?
Yeah, sure. So first, thinking from the top about how AI in general impacts fashion. One person on my team at Unfolding Strategies is currently doing a quite beautiful research about it, but mainly thinking how generative AI tools can support fashion design. So this is focus of her current research. And I think it's very important to think how AI can be a creative collaborator. What are the limitations? What are the obstacles? And I think we need to test those collaborative potentials and think how we can move forward. It is also important to think what are the data sets that are feeding into this AI and they're training it, because there's a lot of voices. So this is from like macro perspective. There's a high risk that certain ideas and narratives will be excluded. There are quite fantastic researchers like Timnit Gebru, who was leading research on ethical AI and language models at Google, and left Google with quite loud kind of, let's say, atmosphere. It's not very English proper, but I hope you get what I mean. There are many people signaling that we need to really look into it. So I think particularly those cultural, community, sustainability, generally ethics-related narratives are very, very important in that field. So on one hand, we have this creative potential and, you know, human machine collaboration. That is just another, I would see another step of progression. But on the other hand, is a question what gets included and what gets excluded. And last but not least, the IP. So who are actually the, who are, for example, when we use Midjourney, so to generate images, whose actual images, who are the authors of images that actually were gathered together to create what we see in front of ourselves, and where is the part for intellectual property and all of that.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess that will be all for the for these sections. And so for the audience, please join me for a big round of applause to our speaker today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.